Today we're going to discuss the mitzvah of Tevilat Keilim, our obligation to take utensils that we use for food and tovel or dunk them in a mikvah. So, let's begin. The Torah teaches in Parshat Matot that Bnei Yisrael defeated Midian and captured utensils used for food. The Torah describes Ach et ha-zahav v'et ha-kosef, et ha-nechoshet, et ha-barzel, et ha-bedil, v'et ha-ofaret. Utensils made of gold, silver, copper, iron, tin, and lead, all metals. Bnei Yisrael were instructed that besides making these utensils kosher, ach b'nei nida yitchata, to tovel them in purifying waters of the mikvah. Rashi and most Rishonim understand this to be a mitzvah d'oraita, a commandment given by Kadosh Baruch Hu through the Torah. The Rambam, however, understands Tevilat Keilim to be a mitzvah d'Rabbanan that is hinted to in the Torah. To review, Rashi and most Rishonim hold this is a mitzvah d'oraita, and that's actually the way we hold. The Rambam understands this to be a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. The Gemara teaches us that the obligation to tovel our utensils applies even to new utensils. We see from here that tefillah is not to make the utensils kosher. Rather, it elevates them. It makes them holier. Now, the psukim that we learned only spoke of metal kelim. So the mitzvah min HaTorah only applies to metal kelim. However, the Gemara teaches us that midrabanan, rabbinically, we are obligated to tovel glass utensils as well. Next, let's take a look at an actual kelim mikvah. You can see on the wall that we say our bracha before we dunk the utensils. Asher kiddushanu v'mitzotav v'tzivanu al Tevilat Keilim. For convenience, this mikvah has some instructions on the wall. Let's take a closer look at them. In the left column, as we have learned, it says that utensils made of metal or glass need to be dunked in the mikvah. In the right column, we see three important exceptions. First, earthenware utensils, such as those made of china or porcelain, do not need tefillah. Second, utensils that were made in Israel don't need tefillah either. This is because only utensils that were owned by a non-Jew need tefillah, and we assume that utensils from Israel were owned exclusively by Jews. Finally, utensils made of plastic do not need tefillah either. One last important thing. The mitzvah of Tevilat Keilim doesn't apply just to utensils that we use to eat. It applies to all metal or glass utensils that come into direct contact with food, even when preparing or storing the food. Now, let's look at some examples and decide whether these kelim do or don't need tefillah. Well, these are made of glass, and they come into direct contact with food. So yes, they do need tefillah. These utensils are made of china. So as we've learned, they don't need tefillah. What about this plate? Well, it's made of glass, and it comes into direct contact with food. So yes, it does need tefillah in a mikvah. This stove grate is a little bit trickier. It's made of metal and is used in preparing food. However, it is not intended to come into direct contact with the food, so it doesn't get dunked. Now this utensil is made of metal and it does come into direct contact with food. However, the halacha is that disposable utensils do not require tefillah in a mikvah. What about this hot water urn? The trick here is that it plugs into the wall. There are three opinions concerning utensils like this one. The first opinion is that you have to completely immerse it. The problem is that the utensil might get ruined. The second opinion is that you only have to dunk it up until its electrical parts. The third view is that utensils that plug into the wall never require tefillah. Please consult your Rav if this question comes up for you. Now these hot water urns certainly need tefillah. They're made of metal, they come into direct contact with water, and they're heated by fire. Here are your classic coffee can and coffee jar. So what's the halacha? Well, they're disposable, so they don't need tefillah. The exception is if you decide to use cans and jars like these for storage, then they are no longer disposable, and therefore you would need to tovel them. What have we here? The flatware here is metal, and it comes into direct contact with food. So yes, it needs to be dunked. Pretty easy. However, the napkin ring doesn't, since it is not meant to touch the food. Now what about this spatula? On the one hand, it has a lot of metal. However, the part that we care about is the part that's supposed to touch the food. Here, that part is made of plastic, and plastic utensils do not go to the mikvah. So the spatula doesn't need tefillah. These steak knives, however, are the opposite. The handles are plastic, and the blades are metal. So they do need to go to the mikvah. By now, this one is easy. They are metal and come into direct contact with food. So they need tefillah minha Torah. Now this Kiddush cup is interesting. On the one hand, it's made of metal and does come into direct contact with the food. However, we see it is made in Israel. And as we learned before, if something is made in Israel, we assume it was only owned by Jews. So it does not need tefillah. However, when it comes to items purchased in large chain stores or utensils that were made in countries other than Israel, we assume that they require tefillah. One last important thing. Because the mikvah water needs to touch the entire surface of the kli, be sure to remove all tags, stickers, and residue before dunking your utensils in the mikvah. So, let's review. Before they can be used, utensils made of metal or glass that will touch food need to go to the mikvah. Disposable utensils and utensils owned exclusively by Jews don't need the mikvah. Neither do utensils made of china or plastic. Finally, be sure that nothing is on the utensils before you dunk them. It was great learning with you. Let's do it again.